like, I want to skip this hard part. I'm going to go eat. I'm going to go look at porn. I'm going to go do whatever to ignore this. And we're just cheating ourselves, aren't we?
Okay, like all of that drinking and drug abuse can't, like that got me through 5 years. It can't get me through the next 50. So I thought, well, I need to get serious here. Oh, Jesus is just like everything else. He's a door I can walk through or not. I don't have to do anything. That's the beginning of insight. And it's the beginning of freedom. Freedom from sin. Why? Because I don't need to avoid anything anymore. I don't need to run anywhere or do anything that's going to hurt me or others. I can really treat this loneliness as a companion and just listen to what it's saying.
I discovered you probably like 4 or 5 years ago. And then my wife.
That's when I discovered you.
Well, okay, that's when we discovered each other. But remember, we went to a meditation retreat. And
yes,
it was life-changing.
That's right. You were in what's that town in southern Utah? Anyway, that was
Spring City.
Spring City. Man, Spring City is magic.
Do you remember that specific retreat?
Oh yeah, I remember like 75 of us packed into a barn in this little artist colony. That was grand. And I met you and Allison. That was lovely.
That's right.
That was so good.
Yeah, you were kind of larger than life. We went and you're just so chill and grounded, which you talk about in your book on what a gift that is to people who are going through pain. We'll talk about that. But one of the most life-changing experiences from that event was when you had us stare into a neighbor's eyes.
Oh yeah.
I don't remember how long we did that. But that was something that I would never think to do.
Right.
It's creepy outside of this type of experience. But I didn't know who the woman was. She didn't know me. We randomly pick and then we stare into each other's eyes. I don't understand what fully happened, but I think what happened is my ego was broken down, and I think my thinking mind was silenced, and my heart opened up. And is that the point of that exercise? I mean, when you guide that, what do you hope for?
Yeah, I just got back from a workshop last weekend where I had a group of people do that. I mean, eye gazing is one entryway into deeper embodiment in ourselves because it's intense. So when you're looking in someone's eyes, if you're paying attention, you feel like your own body a lot.
That's what it is.
It's also a gateway to intimacy because if we learn how to relax into that intensity, we often get an insight that whatever it is that's looking out through our eyes seems to be the same thing that's looking back at us through other eyes. Dude. So it tends to facilitate an experience of oneness or union. So it's, one of my favorite tricks. Yeah.
Dude, that's what it was. And it was very intimate, not sexually, but very just spiritually and oneness with a fellow earth cousin, as I like the term.
Totally. That's awesome.
Yeah, I'll never forget that experience. Okay, can you start, I know your story is really, I just want to give the listeners a taste of why you do what you do and some of the reasons you became who you are. So give us a little bit of that, and then we're going to jump into what I love about your new book.
Cool. Thank you. Well, I'll give the abbreviated version, and if we want to zoom in on any one part, we can do that. But the abbreviated version is that I was raised in a really traditional, stalwart Christian family, Christian home. Didn't work for me. I didn't care for religion from a really early age. It caused havoc in my family to kind of leave the religion or refuse to participate. That led to a lot of estrangement from my family, a lot of reckless years in my adolescence through high school. Before I buckled down, by the time I moved out of my parents, when I was like late teenager, 18 or so, I realized, okay, like all of that carousing and drinking and drug abuse that got me through 5 years. It can't get me through the next 50. So I thought, well, I need to get serious here. Like, what's a sustainable plan? There happened to be a Zen center, like a thriving Zen community down the street from me, my first college apartment in that neighborhood. So I showed up for a one-day retreat, and something about the stillness, something about the discipline of still sitting, or zazen, it's called in Zen, it just spoke to me. the simplicity of it. Nobody told me what stillness is supposed to mean. I could tell from the moment I sat still in meditation that it was totally intimate and totally unique to me. And I could either walk through that door and discover what was there or not. And I was intrigued, so I kept doing it. And I've been doing it every day for 25 years now. And as I did that, as I took up a practice of still sitting and meditation, and that took me all over the world to work with different teachers and so forth. But the more I did it, the more it kind of broke my heart open to everything and everybody. And a little unexpectedly, even to my dismay in my early 30s, that kind of broken openness that the still sitting practice led me to, it brought me full circle to my family and my hometown and Jesus. And I realized for myself in my own way, like, oh, Jesus is just like everything else. He's a door I can walk through and be open-hearted about it and see what there is, or not. I don't have to do anything. But I walked through that door and realized, I was like thoroughly identified as a Buddhist at that point. I hadn't been involved in a Christian community for 20 years. And the more I spent time in the congregation, the more time I spent getting to know Jesus. Like you just talked about earth cousins. I'm like, man, Jesus and the Buddha, these are earth cousins. I know they love each other and they're one in my heart. It was just a joy. It felt like a homecoming. Like what was painful and even traumatic for me as, a youngster, I came back and I realized, yeah, we're still making a mess of this whole Jesus thing and church thing. We're still doing that. But of course, because we're human and we make a mess of everything. But the universe is so generous, it gives us another chance and another chance to wise up and do better. So I started, that whole story, that was my attempt at an abbreviated conversation. Maybe some listeners are like, oh, that was the short version. But just really intuitively in my early 30s, as I was, rediscovering Jesus, I realized there were a lot of people like me, a whole life cycle, a generation later, who were going through something really similar. So I started to gather with that, similar in that like they weren't interested in religion.
Can we stop right there? So sure. I'm 41. How old are you?
43.
Okay, so we grew up in the 90s, and there seemed to be an era of the 90s where I just know what you're saying. Like I grew up in a Christian household too, and it was like these are the rules. And you talk about like if in your book specifically like. We'll go back to Jesus. Your interpretation of the prodigal son like blew my mind because we tend to think like we're the good brother who did all the rules, but right. you say well, actually, I don't want to read it. Can you just tell us your interpretation of it? Because this is so fascinating.
Sure, yeah. And, it's a story of myself, right? Like, I'm not saying it's the truth. If people like it, they can like it.
No, it's an interpretation. But, and it spoke truth to me. Like, it totally flipped that because I've always identified as the righteous one who's like, oh, yeah, we just got to accept that, but I'll be taken care of because I did this. I followed
That's right,
rules.
That's right.
Okay.
I mean,
yes.
Yeah, my reading on that is like, more or less that the prodigal son, we don't actually know which one that is, A. And okay, B, that's cool. the one who squanders his inheritance is the lucky one in the sense that he became abjectly depressed enough about his existence that he woke up in one moment. He came back to himself. And I think there's good evidence in the text that like coming to oneself is the point. In that case, like one brother, he lives out his life through profligate living and, a debauched lifestyle, that stuff. And the other brother, we could say, is squandering his life through this illusion that if he's just better than everybody else, something good will eventually come to him. But in the end, I can't ignore the detail in the prodigal son that it's the older obedient son who is too close-hearted to come in and enjoy the party.
Yeah, he's mad. He stayed out crying and being a baby and not celebrating the return of his brother. We
could imagine that he's bitter and coming to terms with like, hey, I did all this hard work. Where's my payoff? And I think maybe one of the lessons I've taken from the gospel is that God's love is so radical and abundant. If we approach it with a calculating mindset, we'll never get it. We'll never understand it. So we have to, in our own way, we have to break open to that divine generosity, and it will break our heart one way or another.
That's what I want to go to next. You say when we are honest about who we really are, we realize we're called to the cross, meaning we're imperfect. We need Jesus. We're called to die to the one we thought we were again and again.
Yeah. I mean, that's the book right there. I think for me, that's what's interesting to me about the gospel. I love that everybody can take what they take from the gospel, but what's been interesting to me is this invitation to let go of who I thought I was. And when that sounds like I just said that, it was so easy. Just let go of who you think you are. But when we actually do that, as I've tried to do that in my life, I realize it's terrifying. It feels like I'm dying if I let go of who I think I am. But I think the gospel invites us to do that, to let go of who we think we are, to die. And we don't know who we're going to be, 3 days later when we're resurrected. We don't know. And that's scary, but we can have faith.
That's true. Even before that concept of like letting ourselves die over and over, I think for me it was super important to understand how you explain the difference between how the mind does things and the heart does things. This is one of the biggest paradigms that I've experienced in a long time.
Cool.
Instead of me telling you what I got out of it, would you explain how the mind works? And I can preface it specifically. You say the mind loves to have answers. It hates to not know. When we are willing to travel without light or guide, that is, the conventional support of intellectual understanding, a knowing beyond any understanding burns within us. Ooh. And I want to continue with this because now that I put myself in this like podcasting realm where I talk about God a lot, I'm having a lot more conversations. People come to me, and one thing that I'm seeing over and over is people when they have a faith crisis or they have doubts and they can't move past it, right? Like there seems to be a roadblock. I now can see in myself and in them, it's because they're keeping it in their mind. And you state that the mind likes to divide and differentiate things. Right. And then why don't you just go from there and then continue on with my thought? Because you're going to say it better.
Well, no, I love what you're saying. I feel like as somebody who, it's fresh in your heart and your life and in a different way from mine. So I'm curious what you'll say about it.
Okay. I'll keep going then. So, I mean, to me, what I got was the mind puts, like, they can observe another person or an idea or a fact, and it differentiates things like this is this, this is that. And another thing it does is it says, myself is back here. My mind can compartmentalize that. I'm separate from others, right? Right. And then, but that the mind only gets us so far. And we can see that throughout the history of the world. And like at one time, we were the center of the universe. Science changes, discoveries are made. And so the mind is not the end all be all, which is a mistake for people. But the heart, as you say, once we open that up, which is really hard because it's super sensitive and we don't know who we are or what's going to happen. The heart unifies. I love this. It unifies, it embraces, it takes on, we're responsible for all creation. We get very vulnerable and strengthened in that vulnerability, and it's just so much more beautiful. And then we can use the mind and the faculties to like piece it all together. I'd love your take on that.
Well said. I love it. I love it all. Maybe to give people a quick background who don't know, my hot take on it or know my work. I'm not setting up the mind and the heart as these kind of dueling enemies, and we need to get to the heart. And I think you just said that, but it merits repeating because we can easily be interpreted that way. The mind is brilliant at what it does, and the mind, in a word, it sees difference. It differentiates. Like, this is not that. I am not you. And that's super helpful for a trillion applications in life, right? Like when I cross a street, I need to differentiate between like oncoming traffic and traffic that's already passed me, and so on and so forth. And when someone has boundaries, it's good to know that that's their boundaries. Those are different from mine, but I got to respect them, right? Enough said. But if we're stuck in the gear of differentiation, if all we can do is see difference, then all we can do is see difference. And eventually we're going to feel this burnout and isolation and loneliness. And I think in some ways abandonment, like at a spiritual, at a deep existential level, I'm stuck in this head where I'm here and everything else is out there, including God. God is alien to me. God is some like impossible to reach other. And there's a tremendously rich contemplative tradition in Christianity that says we, in the words of the Philokalia, which is an really a keystone text in the Eastern Orthodox tradition, we need to learn to put the mind in the heart. And what does that mean? To wake up the heart and to experience the world and creation through the heart. And as we do that, like you pointed to, we don't experience differentiation, it's unity. We realize our heart, in our heart's knowing, it is resonating sympathetically with all of creation. We have an intuition deeper than the thinking mind that I'm one with everything. I'm intimate with all of creation. And I would suggest as that insight deepens that everything actually presents itself as divine love. Don't take my word for it, but it's not just like I'm one with all the molecules in the universe. That would be pretty cool, probably. Mm-hmm. But like my experience in the heart's knowing is that I'm actually one with divine love, and I'm an expression of divine love, like a wave on the ocean. And therefore I participate in God's nature. And that's a joy to have that invitation to do so. Yeah, we read about that in the New Testament from, St. John and St. Paul and so forth.
That I've personally had small glimpses through spiritual experiences and meditations, and I think one thing is I want to have heart experiences.
Yeah.
And that right there, wanting something,
yeah,
has a lot of power, right? Like, at least for me, like, it has so much power if you want it. And so one of my goals with you today is, there's a lot of people that ruminate and stay in the mind, and they've lived life in the mind. Yeah. One, because it seems to be safer, and two, because they haven't been shown how to open the heart. Would you give us a 101 on someone who's like, I don't even understand what we're talking about today, but what bringing the heart into your life and being embodied in that can do for them?
For sure. Yeah, I think at the most basic level, we can cultivate a habit of catching ourselves in compulsive thinking. I mean, I've been teaching full-time 12 years now. I can't think of a single student who doesn't experience often, many dozens or hundreds of times a day, I'm just lost in thought. I'm thinking all the time. I'm thinking about what happened. I'm thinking about what comes next. I'm anxious. All that stuff. When we notice we're caught in thinking, which is almost all the time, we can learn to redirect and ask, is there some embodied experience in the heart and the body that I'm avoiding by thinking? It's such a simple question.
Do you mean by, let's define embodied, do you mean like being separate from the heart? Being embodied means like being in the heart? Is that what you're saying?
In this case, I mean, there are different kinds of practice we can take up. That's a great question. For my purposes here, I'm suggesting that whenever we're feeling something intense in the body, in terms of sensation, physical sensation, whenever we're feeling something painful in the heart, like an emotion, it's a natural thing to do to start to think about it. Because when we think about it, it numbs it out a little bit. It's less immediate. I'm blunting the force of that. Mm-hmm. And I'm also investing in the story, like, I'll figure this out. Once I figure this out, I'll never have to feel this awful again. And for me, it was a real epiphany when I realized I'm trying to outthink my embodied vulnerability. Because for as long as I've been alive, I've felt intense sensation in the body that really disturbs me sometimes. I felt pain in my heart that I don't know what to do with. And once I just started to let go of that fantasy, like if I just think my way through it, I'll finally, once and for all, escape from this prison. And it turned out that the opposite was true, that if I actually had more faith in my capacity to just be fully in my embodied experience and open-hearted, that the pain was, if I can use a Christian term, the pain was consecrated. It was sacramental. The pain was inviting me deeper into embodiment. And I think that's how Jesus lived. I think Jesus's whole embodied life was a sacrament. And he had a million opportunities to go up and out, to just like to leave it all. And I think what he showed us was the path of down and through. It's like, no, you can be with even this pain. You can be with this much pain and more. Your heart is so big, you can't imagine how big your heart is and how much it can hold. That's how Christ speaks to me.
Oh my gosh. Okay. Well, I love that. I don't want to say I need to go think about that. I want to feel that.
You can think about that. But then, we need to live it. And that's always difficult. It's always painful and difficult.
Yeah. I like that. I've never thought it makes sense, but Christ had the power to ascend and just like, oh, I want to skip this part, which essentially is what we do when we numb, right? Like, I want to skip this part, this hard part. I'm going to go eat. I'm going to go look at porn. I'm going to go do whatever to ignore this. And we're just cheating ourselves, aren't we?
Yeah, totally. I mean, I have these moments. I'm raising a 3.5-year-old. I mean, if that doesn't like get you down into your like disturbance in the body, it's like every 10 seconds, I got this plan, like, hey, we're going to do this. He's like, no. Like, how do I stay with that? So life is so generous. God is so generous in God's willingness to give us another chance and another chance. If we missed it 5 seconds ago, here's another one. You can be completely open-hearted to this one. It's really remarkable.
It totally is. What's your favorite way, or what way do you cherish most that God reveals himself to you?
Oh man, it's difficult. It changes all the time. I haven't seen you, but I bumped into you at a solar eclipse of all places.
That's cool.
And, I feel a real heart connection from you since the moment we met. And one way God reveals the divine mystery is through acquaintances. It's like when I circle back and I hear your voice and I see your face and get to talk to you, I have this experience like, oh yeah, like the universe, it's familiar to me. And like this friendly face and loving heart is welcoming me home. So that's what I would say. That's what's most present in this moment, is to reconnect with a friend.
Do you know what I love is that answer could be infinite for so many people.
Yeah.
Which to me points to the greatness of God.
Yeah.
So your answer surprised me. I do appreciate acquaintances. I don't know if that would be the first thing that I do. So I'm just so grateful for that answer.
Cool.
Going back to the person who is tired of rumination and worry and overthinking, you introduced a concept called still sitting.
Yeah.
Which isn't necessarily meditation.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
Can you talk about that? Because I really like this.
Yeah, I'm grateful to my Buddhist brothers and sisters because like a big part of their tradition is to just sit still and do nothing. And I realized that an image, a metaphor I've used to kind of describe it to others who are curious about it over the years, when you go to the doctors, let's say you've torn a ligament or a tendon, they got to like MRI your knee or something. They sometimes, depending on the technology, they'll inject some dye into the joint to make the contrast more bright, or they'll put you through a magnet, the MRI. And it's they're trying to create a high resolution image of what's going on, like where's the injury, where's the pain, right? Still sitting is like that technology where if I allow myself to just flit about and avoid myself and numb out all day, every day, which I do. We all do that to some extent because human life is intense and it can be very painful. But if we just slow down a little bit, if we slow down 2% and like start to move towards still sitting, stillness, we get a clearer image of like, where am I actually suffering? And if we slow down even more, it's like, oh, like until I slowed down, I didn't realize like how painful that interaction was with my parents the other day. Or whatever. If we get even more still, we realize, oh man, I've actually been watching a lot more like Netflix the last 3 days because I've been in so much pain, I didn't know what to do with it. The more we slow down, the higher resolution image we get of like right where we're suffering and right where we're avoiding. And to me, just that clear image of where we're suffering, it invites us through a door. We can go through that door or not. But we can ask ourselves, well, what would it be like if I just stopped avoiding that? What if I allowed myself to completely embody the pain that I'm actually already feeling? It's already happening. Do I want to continue to avoid it and numb it? Or what if I felt it fully? And without getting into the neuroscience and the physiology, this is what I'm doing my research on right now on my thesis. But I think what happens when we do that is we're able to completely experience what we need to experience. And the body has a way of just shaking it. It's like, okay, I felt that now. I don't need to avoid it. I don't need to do anything to it. I completely joined myself with the pain, and I can do the next thing now.
So are you suggesting that if you feel pain, that it's almost like a filter? It's going to go away because you let it go through you? Is that what you're suggesting?
Of course, I need to make a distinction here that is intuitive, but let's just make it. There's pain, like a genuine signal that I'm not okay. If my hand is held over an open flame and there's pain, I'm not saying just like examine that without moving. Most of the pain most people experience in our modern world, it's more of a subliminal pain. It's underneath the surface. We're not totally aware of it. The body is anxious, sometimes even panicky that we're feeling this. And it dates back to early life and deep vulnerabilities we carry just from having a human body, having a particular childhood where we all took our lumps and, got scraped up a little bit. But we realize in our adulthood, like, oh, even though my body is super anxious, maybe even panicky, there's no evidence that I'm in danger right now. I can actually just learn to relax with this level of pain. And when we do that in a psychological sense, we're building our confidence to remain more and more embodied and just live an open, spontaneous, honest life. I think in a theological sense, we're imitating Christ. Like we mentioned before, we're actually doing the difficult work of bringing spirit more deeply into the body, into matter, and joining spirit and matter as one. So I think whether we're religious or just secular folk, I think there's a lot to recommend this practice. And I talk about it a lot in the book. I think it's a major aspect of Christianity, and it's just a big part of human living.
It does. It is. I think that it's kind of like an analogy for faith and belief, right? Like, if I feel that God wants me to do something, it's gonna. I have to acknowledge that I have that feeling, right? It might be uncomfortable that I feel like I need to do this, and then instead of running away or numbing, it's like I have to step through it, and that's what you're saying is like we have these feelings, we got to like step down, consecrate it. That's a beautiful thought. I love that connection of the spiritual and the physical feelings that we experience.
Thank you. Wow. In the book, I mean, maybe you want to move on, but it might help listeners to like connect this last dot, at least to the Christian tradition.
Yeah.
My intuition, I'm not saying this is the law and the truth, but my intuition is that the way we talk about sin in Christianity, it actually, that impulse towards sin actually comes from this very topic we're exploring here, which is anytime there's a level of discomfort, pain, suffering in my body, in my heart, I just don't think I can bear it. What's the first thing I do? I try to relieve it. I try to get away from it. And like whenever we're not willing to feel how we're actually feeling and we're moving towards some kind of relief, we often justify anything we do or say, saying like, that's not my fault. I was going to die. I couldn't handle that. Right. But the more we develop that kind of divine confidence in our capacity to live everything and feel everything, then this temptation to sin, it's like, why would I do that if it hurts me and it hurts others? I don't need to do that. So I think there is a correlation there to how we talk about sin, but that's a longer conversation.
That's a really just higher level perspective of sin. Thank you for that. I'd never thought about that. It feels true totally. Though. Yeah. So, what is there things that have surprised you in your life when you're more embodied? Like, is there things that shock you, or do things seem more simple, more complex? Do you see more miracles? Like, what happens when you're more embodied?
Lots of things. That's an awesome question. One thing I notice, my mind gets incredibly quiet. Hard stop. Like, it's just quiet up there. Of course it's available. I think of it as a car. Like when you have a stick shift and the motor's running, if you want to pop it into first and go, you can always do that. But you don't have to go. You can just park it and leave the engine running. That's how my mind feels. The more embodied I am over the years, and I'm not saying I've perfected this by any stretch, but that feeling of popping the car into neutral and realizing I don't need to think right now. There's no emergency to solve. I'm just going to hang out in the open expanse of God's creation. So I find that my mind gets really quiet and my capacity to just take in beauty and experience the world in an unmediated way, right? Not filtering everything through what I think about it, just like sensing it. That changes everything.
And can that be, and I know you, and I think I know the answer. Can that just be sitting? Can that just, that's not like you have to see a sunset to enjoy. You don't have to go out.
Oh, thank you. You do know me. You just lobbed me a softball there.
Yeah. But you can, dude, I remember this specifically at the retreat. I noticed how you were eating the food, and you were treating it as if there was nothing better in the world. And I'm like, this food's really good. And you were just like so slow. I could tell that like it was not passing your tongue without being enjoyment. And so my thing is, I suspect when you say just a quiet mind, enjoying life, I mean, you could be sitting in a chair. You could be just wherever you are, right? You could be sitting at a stoplight. It doesn't have to be this time where like, oh, I'm just going to sit and not do anything. It's like a way of living, I expect is what you might suggest.
This is an amazing, I love your question in this direction because it's the flip side of everything we've been talking about. When we've given up our resistance to the actual reality of our lives, in this moment, I am like when Christ kneels in Gethsemane and says like, oh, this is a tough one, but I am willing, thy will be done. When we learn just a little bit of thy will be done and we stop fighting with every embodied moment, the world reveals its incredible pleasure, joy, and even ecstasy. If there's no thought about things should be different, I don't like this, if I'm just open, I find embodied reality to be incredibly pleasurable. Even the pain becomes pleasurable. Those are just two sides of the same coin. So yeah, I mean, that's one of the great kind of practical benefits of like this practice, you could call it, that we're talking about. I don't have to travel to the other side of the world anymore to have a good day or something memorable. It's like if I'm just willing in this moment and embodied and open, the simplest of experiences reveals the face of God. That can sound lofty and that can sound affected. I'm not trying to, not trying to sell something here or speak in such lofty terms, but it's true. When William Blake says you see the universe in a grain of sand, when Thich Nhat Hanh, the renowned Vietnamese monk, says, when I eat this orange, I taste the whole universe in it. They're not just using words. They're actually speaking to a depth of prayer that we're all capable of. And we're not just capable of, we're invited to it. In God's generosity, we're invited to it, I would say. That's
another testimony to me. The greatness of God is we all have that. The kingdom of God is within us. It's accessible right now. In fact, it's only accessible right now. It's not accessible yesterday or tomorrow. Have you read C.S. Lewis's Surprised by Joy? I'm just making this connection right now.
I love it. Give it to me.
He opens the book by saying there's all these times in his life, and there's not a ton. There's times in his childhood where he, like his brother got like maybe a cigarette can or something, and went out in the garden and made like a little miniature something, like a little scene. And then there's a time when I can't remember all the different times, but they're insignificant on the grand scheme, but these were joyful experiences. Then he follows up by saying, when I went into thinking about them, they were gone. You can't think about joy and experience joy.
Yeah, that's cool. I love that.
It's very really much. I mean, you just explained it, but he was explaining that too, and I forgot I read that years ago, but that just came to my mind and how
I love that.
True that
absolutely is. Very powerful. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Well, I'm going to give you the last word. I know you have something coming up. First off, thank you so much for sharing your time and hanging out with me.
That's fun. Yeah, no, my heart just feels full with you, Eric. I love it.
Well, Likewise. I feel so blessed to be able to just talk to rad dudes that are chasing the light. And it's fun. I would love to give you the last word to wrap up any thoughts or anything that you feel needs to be said before we go.
Oh, final thoughts. Maybe if you could frame it up, if there's anything more specific than that, because I've loved how you've held the conversation.
Yeah, let me tell you. So my goal is to help men feel less alone in their struggles. And that drives this. And so if you, and you talk to a lot of people, so there's some guy out there, hopefully he made it this far in the conversation, and maybe he needs one more thing from you. What would you say to that guy who's new to this?
That's awesome. I love that question because I'm a modern male who is anything but immune to burnout and loneliness and all that toxic masculinity. It's, all things I need to work with every day. I would say, based on the direction our conversation is taking, like loneliness itself is a form of intensity. Like we don't like to feel lonely. We don't like to feel extremely lonely. And so often when that's coming up in our body, we're feeling that intensity, we're feeling our heart, and they're difficult emotions, we tend to do something like whatever to stave off the loneliness. And it's often, not always, but it's often unhealthy behavior, at least for me. Mm-hmm. To actually treat loneliness as a form of accompaniment. It's actually divine accompaniment. If we orient towards the loneliness as like, these are intense signals coming up in my body, and they're telling me something. Like the prodigal son, they're calling me back to myself. Mm. And if I don't run from them, if I escape rather than from them, I escape into them, I believe something really powerful about our lives will be revealed to us. And that'll be different for all of us. But, if we can meet that disturbance, go right to the heart of it, that's the beginning of insight. And it's the beginning of freedom. Freedom from sin. Why? Because I don't need to avoid anything anymore. I don't need to run anywhere or do anything that's going to hurt me or others. I can really treat this loneliness as a companion and just listen to what it's saying.
I love that so much. You've, just the way you described that has given me just so much courage to make that choice to go in instead of around. I love it.
Yeah. It's tough and we need each other. It's so hard, actually. I need help from my teachers and my friends and family, but we can do it.
We can. Yeah, that's why stories and podcasts and being in people's lives is so important. And the gospel of Jesus Christ encourages that. And so that's one of the reasons why I'm in. So Thomas, thank you so much.
Yeah. Thanks, Eric. Great to talk to you.
Oh, hey, and I want to just mention, this is what the book looks like. You need to buy it immediately. It's called At One-ment. Yeah. Embodying the fullness of human divinity. And so we're going to link to that for sure. People need this. This is a handbook for happiness. I'm convinced. So thank you, Thomas.
Thanks, Eric. I really appreciate that.